Good evening and welcome back to Dialogue with the Diaspora. I am Ambassador Dan Gutierrez and I shall be your host. Belize is described as Mother Nature's best kept secret by most and a jewel by all. Naturally, every Belizean wishes to own a piece of the jewel, even those Belizeans thousands of miles away in our diaspora. Some wish to invest in farming or rental units, while others seek to build a house so they can come back home and retire in this paradise we call home. Unfortunately, navigating the processes to complete land transactions is often challenging. And we know that there are positive developments at the Lands Department. So tonight, we are discussing land matters and Belizeans at home and abroad can benefit from this conversation. Because of COVID prevention restrictions, we won't be having any in-studio guests tonight. Joining us virtually will be CEO in the Ministry of Natural Resources, Mr. Kerry Belize, and also joining us from the diaspora, we will have Mr. Carl Villanueva, who is the President of the Preservation of Belize Culture and History, a non-profit organization based in Chicago. He is a former Executive Director of the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry and has worked as a journalist both in Belize and in the United States. Currently, he co-manages the Belize Diaspora Food Mission and is very, very active in the Belizean community in the United States. Joining us also is Mr. Robert Riddick, Belizean American, who is a former biomedical engineer and is currently an independent contractor who services hospitals throughout the northeastern United States. Welcome, gentlemen. To start off our conversation, I'm thinking that it's best to give the viewers an overview of what the Ministry of Natural Resources is all about. What are the departments that exist in the ministry? What do they do? Kerry.
Good night, Dan. Thanks. That's a heavy load to start talking off with tonight, but it's certainly my pleasure to be on the show. And sorry we can't be in studios and to be able to address the wider diaspora from Belize. And I hope that we can share with you tonight some of what the ministry is working on, accept some of our challenges, and hopefully use this as an opportunity to improve on the service that we provide. But maybe first off, then, as you had indicated, that the traditional reference that is made to the ministry is land. And sometimes it's important, and this is an opportunity for me to share that what we call the Lands Department, we know it as the Ministry of Natural Resources, really covers a lot more than just maybe simple or basic land administration. And so the ministry has 4 different sections under its mandate. And those sections are firstly the Lands and Surveys Department, which in fact most people will be most aware of. And that department in itself is really the largest department and itself has 5 different subsections of that department. And those sections cover matters from subdivisions, from registering surveys, administering, of course, national land on behalf of the government, and a whole range of activities that go into the course of somebody making an application and that application coming ultimately to fruition in title ownership. In addition to that, the ministry also has a registry department. And the registry department primarily administers transactions for private land matters. And those private land matters, for the most part, refer to transfer of land between 2 private owners, but registers a lot of other related instruments. For instance, bill of sales. When you go to the bank, you do a bill of sale, it is registered at the land department. You mortgage your home, it is registered at the registry department. I apologize. So that the range of services provided by the registry department is somewhere around about 120 to 140 different services. The ministry also houses what we call the mining unit. Anybody who wants to mine for sand, quarry, rock, even minerals under the ground would make an application to that unit, and that unit would then conduct its own works to ensure that there's all due process to granting that license. And then finally, the hydrology unit, which really executes on the government's policy for water resources across the country. So, in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that the range of services across the ministry extend well beyond the traditional lands as it is often described. And those functions reside primarily at Belmopan, but also our offices across about 6 offices and 175 staff on a daily basis conduct the various functions across the ministry. So, what we always try to emphasize is that there are a lot of moving parts, and when an application or when any request is made of the ministry, sometimes there is maybe the perception that it's straightforward activity, but there are a number of things that must be brought into the process and laws that must also be adhered to in the execution of a transaction. So, I don't know, Dan, if that speaks to some of what the ministry provides as general function.
Perhaps, Kerry, I think what we should do, because we really only have an hour, and you may think an hour is a lot, it is not. It really races by. I would like to involve our other guests from the very beginning so they can ask the questions, because this is not a show about any ambassador asking the question. It is a show about our diaspora asking the questions. Robert, I am sure that the interaction with the Lands Department is something you may have heard about, friends, family, other people in the diaspora. What questions, concerns, suggestions, what have you what would you say to CEO Belize, since we have him here with us tonight?
Yes, I would like to say, first of all, good night to everyone, and thanks for having me on. I do, and it's interesting, the ranges of services that you just mentioned, Mr. Bilal, because I didn't know you guys did all of that stuff. But it's good to know that, that the Lands Department is diversified, and that there's a lot of things, moving parts like that you guys do. Now, I have just a few questions, and it's actually, when I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my family members and some friends of mine who are Belizeans who live here in the States and, who own property in Belize and had a number of challenges regarding, property there, and one of the questions I have is, how do you resolve the issue of the Land Department inability to locate a title to a property?
Sorry, inability to locate?
To locate a title of a property. For instance, I have grandparents that's, been living in Belize for 40, 50 years, and the property's been there for that long or more. And I know there's a title to the property. I inherited, for instance, in my case, I inherited a property, but whatever reason it is, I could not get the title to the property. In other words, when I inquired about it, I was told that it doesn't exist.
Yeah, so that's an important issue that we have over the last. Let's paint a picture here. Over the last 10 years, one of the major, I'd say, improvements that have been made to the ministry is the installation of what we call the land folio system. It's an electronic land management software, if I may use that term. And the attempt there was really to take what would have been these title documents, physical documents, that for various reasons over time, and it would be an interesting exercise to actually look at these documents being held in large books. The quality of the prints, the durability of them has been faded to a large degree. Over any number of years, they have been archived in a different place than the ministry itself. So you're right, there's a lot of challenge when it comes to especially older titles. And the installation of the land folio system was an attempt to digitize a lot of what you had, and that would then in the long term not only preserve those records, but make the kinds of search that you're talking about much more efficient. And so that exercise in itself is really, as we speak, we have a process that we are digitizing the titles. So in the instance that you're speaking to, we are fairly confident that we have come a long way from the more mundane task of looking at these documents in its manual form and they're being digitized. But in a specific case that there is no record of a title, the owner of the land does not have a title, and for whatever reason, nobody has access to that title, then the process would be that you would access the registrar of land, who at that time would engage a process, making application for a lost title. There is a publication period that is put out there to ensure that there are no claims being made and that sort of thing. So that is the remedy for that circumstance in an individual instance. But the more systemic remedy is the digitization that is occurring.
Kerry, and Robert asked a very good question. And I think, if I may, the question that many people might have on their minds, or perhaps the area that we could look at, the area that we could hope for is, as you said earlier, digitization. This is 2020. How far are we? How do you see it? How far are we from being able to go online, put in your name, put in a number, and get a lot of information without having to speak to somebody directly at the lands department? It's something that's happening in many different areas and industries. Is it something that you see is doable in the immediate future? We may already be there. I may simply not know.
I would be prepared to say that anyone right now who has an instrument that is in process at the ministry can go onto our website, even during the course of this video, input the tracking. There is a reference number that any land transaction would have. They can input that information into a search box, and they will be able to see the status of their application right now. So that what you're saying then is that for those applications that are not problematic, so for instance, there is an application that has been lodged, and at this point in time, if you lodge an application with the ministry, you get an immediate text message that says to you on your phone, it has been received, and you get that tracking number. That tracking number, you can use it at any time, 24 hours of the day, to go onto our website and see where in fact that application is.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned that. I certainly did not know that. I want to bring in Carl Villanueva. Carl is as I said earlier, Belize burns in his heart and has been a friend. Carl, welcome to this evening's show. You know the topic we're discussing. I'm sure it is something that you yourself may have discussed with Belizeans over the years in the United States. Do you have any questions for Kerry? Please.
Your Excellency, I have a lot of questions, but going back to the electronic stuff, that's some great news. So there will be like a PIN number for each property, because you have a situation where people are selling properties 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Even the government would release properties to 2 different buyers at the same time. If you have a PIN number, wouldn't that be assigned to one property, and whenever you try to sell that property, it's in the system that it's sold or it's owned by a particular person?
Certainly an excellent point, and that matter of duplication is one that is at the core of why we're trying to digitize, so that there is not any reissuance of land. And I can say this, that one of the important exercises that has been undertaken over the last few years, and we continue to try to do so as much as we can, is what we call registration of the land title, so that the process requires that we now ask you to surrender what you may now have as maybe a deed of conveyance or something that is more loosely managed. That is from the old system. We are registering your title so that it is now attached to a specific set of coordinates on a map. And what that does is that gives you greater security of tenure for that property that you own. So in a broad stroke, the exercise of registration and more recently, Belize, Orange Walk, and Corozal have now been registered, and that in itself addresses a lot of what we speak to as duplication. However, though, that doesn't say that it does not happen, and that doesn't say that it has not happened. What we do feel, however, is that with the introduction of what we believe is the opportunity for any person who is purchasing a land or who has a land transaction in process to go online and see where that application is, provides a level of transparency that never existed before. And so that even though we are in large view the administrators of that property, we feel that the introduction of having you be able to look at where your property is and ask us questions on a live chat gives you the kind of access that would help you to help us managing. But yes, it is a concern. We are addressing it through those measures, and we are of the firm view that it has been reduced, but will be more greatly reduced as we get that process installed.
Have you considered having like a unit inside the lands department, like a fraud unit, the police, the lands department, the ministers, whoever is involved in moving land around? Could you have like a fraud unit, maybe 2-3 people, maybe an attorney or two, who will be inside the lands department, will approve every single document that leaves that place, so there's no instance where it is double sell or there's mischief. I have known of, for instance, attorneys, very prestigious attorneys in Belize City, who will take a land title from a sister, a brother, an uncle, and switch it to that person's name, and then there's no recourse. What kind of recourse does the person who gets screwed, what kind of recourse do they have? Is the government going to help out in the instance of help you get back your land?
Well, there are two questions there, right? The first question, Carl, if you'll allow me, was you have actually a suggestion that you have, which I kind of like, honestly, which is, Kerry, is there any thought given to a fraud unit?
At this point, that is not part of the structure at the ministry. One of the things that we sought to do is in this call to have our policy director tuned into the call to make note of the kinds of suggestions that come up. So it is a suggestion that should and ought to be considered. I would say though that part of the, and let me not sound as if though I'm making anything other than what I think is the factual case. In an instance, I'll give you, for instance, where you have a very old title somewhere in the 1800s, because titles have been, held to some degree, ownership has been held to be from a long time ago, early late 1800s. And in the sort of searches that are done internally, there is no indication that a title exists. And that property is, for whatever reason, issued to someone else. Then the recourse that any landowner at that time would have is court of law. So ultimately, court of law. So I'm trying to make a distinction here that there are circumstances that there are genuine reissues, not of a fraudulent nature, and that is why what we have embraced and over time have been putting in place is an improved system of land administration where there is certainty to title, and the registration process is one of them doing that. And then the processes have a foundation that makes it less susceptible to that kind of mistake, and then ultimately makes it more, if you want to use the term, it then becomes easier to prosecute. If you have a fair and structured system, the prosecution can then take place and stand. So,
Yeah, and what's happening too is throughout the world, people are moving to information technology platforms. So certainly that is a direction, as you mentioned earlier, Kerry, that's a direction that GOB has been undertaking, that should be welcome. Robert, we come back to you now.
Yeah.
Many Belizeans want to come home. Sometimes the issue of land doesn't really resonate with people until 1 or 2 years before they need to come home, start to acquire that piece of land and look to start to build a home. What other areas, what other suggestions have you heard in the diaspora? What suggestions, what ideas have you heard? How can we make it easier? How can we make it smoother?
Well, I guess in my opinion would be, as kind of sort of what Mr. Kerry had just said, where where the titles can be resolved to where people are actually getting their titles And so they feel more secure to move back home with ownership title in hand, to be able to either get a loan to fix up the property or what have you. But you have the ownership paper, and that's the challenge. For instance, I wanted to ask also, what should a person do? Because you mentioned, Mr. Carey, if you had a deed of conveyance, and what is the process to get a title from that deed of conveyance status, the title status?
Sure. That is a function that is governed by our registry, the registry department. And firstly, the area where that deed of conveyance is held has to be what we call a declared area. It has to be in law that that area has been declared a registered area. Once that happens, the landowner can fill out, it's a single page form, fill out a single page form, submit the original deed of conveyance that they have with an ID, and for a fairly small fee, the registry will accept that deed of conveyance. There will be a 30-day publishing period required in law, after which time, if there are no claims made on that piece of property, that you will then, we generally afford ourselves about 2 to 3 weeks after publication has been finalized, that you'll be able to pick up a title for that. Now, various individuals may have different experiences doing this, and we've always tried to emphasize that one of the things that has to happen is that there has to be complete and accurate data at the time of any submission, because that makes a huge difference in the timeliness of that processing. So while in fact it's important for us to hold ourselves responsible to deliver, it's also important for us to emphasize to anybody to give us full and complete data, because that as well lowers the risk of anything going wrong. So that can be done.
And I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I have certainly learned a lot, and I am looking forward to the continued conversation. Carl, we will come back to you, but first, we have to take a short break. We have another edition of Belize Classifieds to share. This is a quick listing of Belizean-owned businesses and service providers abroad. Last week, we featured California, and tonight we are featuring the New York area, which is another hub for Belizeans living in the United States.
Belize's dynamic diaspora spans the world, and many Belizeans have set up businesses serving as ambassadors of our warm hospitality, flavors, and get-it-done attitude. When in New York, these are some of the shipping companies you should look out for: AIM Belize Freight and Star Cargo Belize. Want to take care of financial services and investments? Look out for Fairweather Income Tax Preparations and Gilbert Ellis Real Estate. For food and beverage needs, do look out for Cass Rum and Garifuna All-Purpose Seasoning. Supporting Belizean-owned businesses in the diaspora contributes to strong Belizean communities abroad, and it also trickles down to Belizean communities back home.
I was going to say, if you live in the New York area or you plan to visit sometime soon, patronize those Belizean-owned businesses. But I'll go further. Now we can, there are certain things, businesses we can conduct online. So touch base with your Belizean provider. Perhaps you may live in the Midwest and there are products that you can get out of New York, products that you can get out of Belizean-owned businesses in the West Coast. So I will go further and say, patronize those in your area, absolutely. But look out for those that may not be in your area and make sure that you give them an opportunity too, all right? And if you are a Belizean or in any part of the world, there's just an unmatched level of warmth and friendliness that we are used to here at home. And it's important for you to be able to reach out to these businesses, to be able to feel that little bit of Belize when you are away. And with that, we will go for tonight's first ad break, and we will be right back. And welcome back to Dialogue with the Diaspora. Again, I'm Dan Gutierrez, And joining us virtually are CEO Kerry Belize from the Ministry of Natural Resources, and our members of the diaspora tonight are Mr. Carl Villanueva and Mr. Robert Riddick. Before we go back to Carl, let me just mention to our listeners, I know there are many people who have been looking out to follow us on Facebook. They have not been able to do so. It is not an issue of the show. I'm sorry to say it is an issue that has to do with Facebook. We are trying to see how it can be rectified, and we are going to do our best to be able to run the show, even if it is when the show is over, to be able to put that on there for you. But it is not an issue of the show. It is an issue with Facebook. So we do apologize for that. And so let us come back to our guests. Lands, as we know it in Belize, there is a lot to cover. Carl.
Yes. Mr. Belize, not to offend you, but just to give a shout out to Juan Carl over there in San Marcos, Toledo district. He has a group of 90 young Mayan citizens who have literally staked a claim to a piece of land right next to San Marcos, trying to block a private investor or some other person coming in there and just devour the lands next to their village. They have young people there who have no land. They are living on their parents' land, and so they are actually making a stake for that. But besides that, people from the United States come to Belize, and of course, we don't come to Belize to rent. We want to own property, right? In the old days, they said house a lot, not a lot, and then house. So we're scratching for lot right now, and we meet a lot of gangsters on the streets. People who are, I guess, unlicensed, and they will sell you anything and take your money and run. Is there any way the lands department can give out professional licenses, or literally keep an eye on these unscrupulous people who are robbing people who want to get back to Belize to reside?
Sure. I don't think at any point we take offense to matters that arise in terms of land disputes. They are a reality of our environment, and we deal with them as they arise. So that we don't run away from. In terms of any individual who engages in a land transaction, one of the first things we think is important is knowledge. If you want to engage into a transaction, it's always best to equip yourself with as much knowledge as possible to reduce the incidence of fraud. And the more recently launched website, it's in place, perhaps in earnest about 6 months or so now, provides a wealth of data on all land processes, all the different functions of the ministry, showing you faces and names of people who are the management team and the like of the ministry, so that there is enough data for any person who wishes to engage in a transaction, locally or abroad, to equip themselves. Secondly, we have been in recent conversations with the real estate brokers, the Real Estate Association. They have an association of real estate brokers, and we have been in dialogue with them for them to cement legislation to speak about things of what you're speaking to, the standards, the conduct, those sorts of things. Why I say that is because the ministry, the remit of the 175 people, is where our line is drawn. Those persons who purport to act as agents must have some standard by which they conduct themselves, and we have been working very diligently, closely with them to get that sorted. So I think a combination of knowledge and being able to decipher an appropriate agent, if you want to use the term, should help to relieve that issue. I want, though, to make a quick point here that the processes outlined on our website for, let's say in this instance, a Belizean wishes to come and purchase land in country. I mean, traditionally what we find is that the interaction with the diaspora is at the registry. It is purchase of a private land, for that matter. The forms to transfer a land, if you wish to engage in a process, is on our website, so that from your home, you can go on the Ministry of Natural Resources website. There is a tutorial that shows you exactly how to fill in that form. What are the requirements to satisfy the transaction to completion? And so I'm saying to you that while in fact there are agents outside of the ministry whom it's difficult for us to regulate their behavior. We believe that if we equip you with the information, the access, and the means, that you're in a better place to exercise some buyer beware and engage in a transaction with us. So we think that there has been quite a bit of improvement in that area, and our website speaks volumes to that.
You know, Kerry, I'm glad you said that, and Carl, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it is important for us to stick a pin and remind our Belizeans in the our Belizeans in the diaspora, that the Belize of today is not the Belize you left behind. There are tens of thousands of people moving into Belize, of Americans alone, coming to Belize to retire, coming to Belize to live, so that there's a demand pressure there on land, and then there's a whole ambiance that will develop around that. So it is imperative that you do your homework and your research, because the Belize that you left behind is not the same Belize that we have today. And it's important for you to have the knowledge before you engage in any of these activities. Carl, you were about to follow up, and then we go to Robert.
Yes, also, there's a matter of squatters. You know, people take your property and just squat. Does the government help out in regards to, you know, eliminating these folks from your property, or what's the recourse for us?
So I'm making an assumption that somebody is squatting on your private property.
Right.
And
Squatting.
Because the government has perhaps to the police department. So the Ministry of Natural Resources, once you own private land, really, as the owner of that land, it is your responsibility to take matters into court. So that the course of action I would recommend to any private landowner who has a squatting situation or anything of that matter is to really engage the police. What we can do is, where there is a question of ownership, we can give the appropriate kinds of verifications to in fact confirm who is the owner perhaps, and you know what constitutes squatting and that kind of thing. So that would be something that has a legal context in the terms of the police department as well.
Robert.
One more question. Can I go ahead?
Please. You owe Robert a couple of questions after that, Carl, but please go ahead.
One more question. Wow, I forgot my question. Go ahead, Ambassador. Go ahead, please. I forgot my question.
No. I was about to ask Robert, really, what I was about to say was, I know in the United States, for example, when people purchase homes, it is a very different process, and you get a home and you get land, and it's a different process. Because of that experience, have you heard of Belizean Americans looking at perhaps a different model, whereby there are subdivisions that the private sector, and I'm trying to see if we can get the private sector listeners of this program to see if there are opportunities there for private sector development to be responsive to what people in the diaspora may be looking out for?
Well, I think that, you know, people are always looking for, you know, opportunities to, like, for instance, when you say retire, you know, when you want to retire in Belize, first of all, we want to know that, you know, there's property available. And we want to know that, you know, there's locations that maybe are being developed, maybe locations that are going to be developed. As the lands, you know, I know there's a lot of land in Belize, and speaking to what the gentleman had said prior, how does, you know, what is the development process that Belize has got in place to open up lands for people who want to come retire in Belize?
Sure. So that there are a couple of things here. One is that the management or the administration of what you're speaking to in terms of subdivisions is a component of what we call our physical planning department. And what that department does is try to ensure that the developers of any property that will be for resale or any sort of subdivision, if I use the term, meets some basic criteria. So roadways, in terms of space for roadways, open areas, parks, things of that nature. So there is a particular standard that prevails. And this is important because there is always that balance between how many lots you can get in a subdivision versus how much free space there's going to be. So you will appreciate that even though sometimes a claim is made that an application is taking long, there is sometimes a back and forth because the ministry has a responsibility to try to protect the integrity of that subdivision, and the developer may have a pressure to maximize his profits by making a different cut. So it's a dynamic, but it is managed. I would want to go further though and say this, and I think it is the empirical data, not what I am just making up here, but in the last 2 to 3 years, and I'll be direct in making this statement, that the continuation of what had started some years ago in terms of upgrading the land administration system, doing registered areas, separating the administration of private and government land, all those infrastructural developments that occurred maybe over the last 8 to 12 years, something of that nature, set a foundation. And in about 2017, when the current minister, Honorable Ugo Pat, and Deputy Prime Minister came into the seat as the minister, he made a very simple and clear mandate. And that mandate was to ensure that after all of that infrastructural development was put in place, that the person who put in an application, whether it was last month, last year, or 10 years from now, is able to get their document in their hand. That was a simple and plain, clear-cut instruction and mandate. And from that point to where we stand now, we are looking at something in the neighborhood of about 27 to 28,000 instruments, land titles that have been dispersed to various individuals, and a massive reduction in the applications in the pipeline. Am I saying that there aren't persons who can say that they have instruments pending? Absolutely they can. But I'm saying that the numbers clearly indicate that over the last 3 years, since that mandate was put in place to build on the previous infrastructure, that number has been put out there. A lot of it, private developed, maybe people who have been looking at development purposes, all sorts of things would be included, but I'm saying that it would be difficult to argue that there is not a substantial inventory of properties that have now been transferred from government ownership to private hands over the last, especially 3 years. So, just to put some context to that conversation.
Well, that's good to hear. And that's good to hear, Mr. Bilal, because I believe that's encouraging to people like myself and others who like to invest, in Belize. That's my home away from home. And to that degree, I'd always look to invest in Belize. Being like what you said, that I see improvements, happening. I see building going on, and I'm hoping that it's going to continue, like you say.
And we hope to be a part of that growth.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Before I go over to Carl, there was something that when Ambassador Mendes was on the show, he said that I would like to steal a couple of seconds and repeat. If you wanted to build that extension, if you wanted to build that bathroom for mom, if you wanted to fix the veranda on the old family home, it's COVID, the economy in Belize, all over the world, but the economy in Belize hurts. If you were thinking of doing that upgrade, do it now. That is how you can help. That is how you can help the situation back in the country. Invest in your own property and put some money back into the economy. So that's a quick ad for Belize's economy and a request to the diaspora. Carl.
Absolutely. One more thing. I don't want to sound like a special person or we come from a special place, but when Belizeans go to Belize to buy property, is there a way you can fast track their process so they don't change their minds?
No,
I like the way he put that, Kerry. I like the way he put that, so they don't change their minds.
Grab the money quickly. Don't let us get away with that money. Certainly, one of the things that we had, and again, particularly that kind of a transaction, is usually a private land transfer. And in sometime in the middle of last year, we recognized that very same demand for an expedited service. What we had instituted at that time, and I want to try to make this clear. a part of what happens is that when land is being transferred, that there are a set of processes that must govern that transaction. And one of the critical functions there is what we call the valuation process. And many people might have heard of that process, where the government collects a stamp duty on that transfer that is being undertaken. And so it makes it an important then transfer to the government because it actually generates revenues. However, though, what we had done in last year is in an environment that we had a substantial number of items to work on, we introduced what we called an express service, exactly as you just said. And that express service was intended to do two things: to levy an additional express service charge to get the transaction done in what we felt was a reasonable time, and that time was from 48 hours up to a potential 1 week. I can tell you that there were a substantial number of people who took advantage of that express service during the course of last year and early into this year. So we have gotten to a point where we think that it's not and let me say this, the process was not without its challenges. It was a new process, but it benefited hundreds, I'd say thousands of applicants. And that process, although it is less in use now because more of the applications have been processed over the time, and there's a smaller glut of transactions, if you want to say that. But in simple terms, that kind of a service was introduced last year, utilized by many, made some additional revenues for government, and a lot of people got their transactions completed in the course of perhaps a week, and in some instances, a little longer.
I think that is worth repeating because I certainly did not know about that. That there is an express service. Thousands of people have taken advantage of it. And Kerry, I hear you encouraging the members of the diaspora to look into this. Just a quick question before we go to Robert. Is that online as well? Can we find that on the ministry's website?
The transfer process is the same, so that the forms and the process to do a transfer is all the same. What we did was we simply expedited the execution of it so that it would look no different to anybody doing the transaction. I'd say this, perhaps there might be some challenges if it is being done, from a geographically, somewhere in the States. I don't recall us having a specific instance, but I would say that the process should be the same. So what we've learned to do is adapt. Where something comes up, where we are new in facing, we huddle and we come to find solutions. So I don't see why we would not be able to accommodate. And I don't think we've had the instance from anyone in this diaspora, but I don't see why it would not be able to be done. And maybe I should just add that a lot of the transactions that perhaps are done from persons abroad would be done through an agent, through attorneys. And it's quite possible that they have used the service, and not to my knowledge, but they would have used the service. So I can't see why it would not be accessible widely.
Understood. Robert?
Yes, and just quick question. What is that website again, Mr. Barr, that you had mentioned that you can get that information again?
It's the Ministry of Natural Resources website. I'm sorry, even if you go to the Government of Belize website, we'd have a link there. You can go on to it. The website also features a live chat component, so that if you're on there and you have questions that you wanted to ask that you're not sure about the process, you can engage someone who can respond in real time. And where they are unable to respond in real time, they will document your request and get back to you. And that chat is actually captured electronically, so you could have a transcript of that chat that you raise the questions and that kind of thing. So it provides not only information, but it provides a basis for interaction as well. And I think perhaps in very simple terms, what it does is it reduces it reduces the distance that we have now, because you are just as able as anybody in Belize to access the service, to ask questions, and to engage with ministry personnel, and not come and not be here. So yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Kerry, because that is something that companies are using in their marketing outreach all over the world now, where you can actually go online and chat and get real-time answers I didn't know. That's another thing I learned tonight, to be completely honest.
Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
glad that is happening. Carl.
Yes, I'd like to encourage my fellow Belizeans in America to look at Belize as a good spot to live. Start trying to get your land now, because all we have is 8,867 square miles. It's not going to get any bigger. It's going to get smaller maybe. But yeah, look into that land right now and invest that money in Belize. And I also like to give my solidarity to Juan Cal in San Marcos, those 89 or 90 young Mayans who are trying to get a piece of land for their home. We have to keep in mind that these villages are growing, they're expanding, and so we need to save some room for them to expand, and don't give that land next to them to some big-time investor who's just going to speculate and sit on it. Send those guys to Coxsackie Mountain or something. But when it comes to the villages, keep in mind they're expanding, people are staying home, and they want to have a little room for their kids, their grandkids, and so Belize can grow. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important and Kerry, perhaps you can address this, but it's not only about growth, it's about planned growth. And that's an area I know we did not discuss because it's a whole different realm, but perhaps, you can take a couple seconds and say something about it, but you just don't grow, and you just don't grow organically without a plan. There must be a plan, and there are ways to do this, correct?
Absolutely, Ambassador. There are two features I like to speak to when it comes to the kind of plan development you're speaking to. One is what we call the land use policy, a document that has really, to a large degree, has been produced with various input from stakeholders, which speaks to how we go about developing land, giving out land, that kind of thing, in a more rational way than perhaps previously existed. And secondly, and perhaps just as importantly, I think I don't have my dates quite right, but about 3 months ago, we launched what we call the Belize National Spatial Data System, and that then is our Diaspora guest really is an exceptional tool that allows us to use spatial data, coordinates land. We have we are actually populating the portal with all the landmass in the country, the important buildings, the roads, elevations, and all those technical information, so that what it does, it enables any and all users of the system to do the kind of theoretical planning, to do the kinds of modeling, to do the kinds of future planning, and to make scenarios, to look at where are the flood zones, where are the areas of potential agriculturally, where agricultural land may be the best use for that resources versus a subdivision kind of thing. So what I'm saying to you then is that the introduction of the National Spatial Data element to the Ministry of Natural Resources provides a most powerful planning tool that puts us in a place where we then now have the power, with other ministries and all the statutory bodies are part of that unit, to plan how we develop, what are the best scenarios, what are the workable scenarios, and then come to some terms. So I'm not saying that we are going to do it. I'm saying that we are enablers of that kind of a process, and we think that that is really a substantial leap forward in terms of how we go about developing nationally, and that is something that was worked on. I came to meet the project in process, and we simply facilitated and allowed it to develop, and that is a portal that currently exists and holds at the Ministry of Natural Resources.
Okay, Kerry, thank you for that. We have probably a minute and a half or so. We don't have much time. We don't have time for another question, but we have time for quick comments by our guests. Let's start with Robert.
Oh, I've learned a lot tonight. I think that I see that the Lands Department is making progress in various ways of remedying the situation where there's challenges and difficulties from people abroad like myself trying to get title and getting access to transfer title and so forth and so on. And I'm interested in using this website, and I think it'll be a good tool that I could use moving forward to move forward with trying to get these issues resolved.
All right. Carl.
But thank you for that.
Carl,
Yes, yes,
20 seconds. 20 seconds.
I am totally impressed with the innovations at the land department, and I wish you guys the best, and I give my condolences to all the people who lost their lives for COVID-19. I hope you can follow the rules and regulations and live longer.
Absolutely.
Yes.
CEO
Ambassador,
Kerry, you get the last word, sir.
Thank you. You're too kind. Then I'd like to say that from all we've discussed, we are completely aware that there are a lot of challenges still for us to overcome, and we're prepared to deal with those, and we'll make progress. But I want to say that a lot of what has been accomplished really is because there are a core of public officers who are highly trained, very skilled, and very dedicated to what they do. So this is something that we think is attributable really to the staff at the ministry, leadership of the minister, and ultimately what we hope is that this move towards having a more information technology-centric ministry will be a wave as we move forward, that with the input of the diaspora, thankfully, and Belizeans here, we'll be able to improve moving forward. So I'd like to thank our guests and yourselves, Dan, for giving us an opportunity to speak about these things, and again say that the effort is really one that requires all 172 members of the team to make it a success.
Absolutely. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, time is something that is precious. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of another engaging program. I want to thank CEO Belize. I want to thank Robert and Carl, members of our diaspora in the United States, not only for joining us, but for posing these questions and for bringing up some of the issues that we have and that we must face to be able to move Belize ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, Dialogue with the Diaspora will be back again next Thursday at 8 p.m. right here on Channel 7 and on Facebook at Colorblind Multimedia, also on the Government of Belize Press Office and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Facebook. Again, do enjoy the remainder of your evening. Continue to social distance, wear your mask, and be vigilant. Good evening and take care.